Welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello and welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. Nora has been a property tax attorney in private practice since 2005. She has developed a statewide practice in all jurisdictions in Illinois and represents all property classes. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode focuses on a question nearly every owner has asked at some point. Why did my neighbor's taxes go down while mine still went up? Nora will explain how assessment uniformity works in Illinois and why similar looking properties don't always share similar tax bills. Nora, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me again.
When two nearly identical properties get very, very different assessments, what's usually driving the difference behind the scenes?
It depends on which jurisdiction you're in. If you're in Cook County, it could be that there was some sales activity. And then there's other counties that are more likely to what we call chase the sale, meaning if you've got 15 identical properties that haven't sold in 30 years and you've got 5 properties that are exactly the same as those 15 and those have traded hands in the last 5 years, due to the way that the assessment mass appraisal systems work, you may see higher assessed values for the 5 that traded, even though theoretically you shouldn't. If they're identical or if they're similar enough, similarly classified, they should be moving up together, the whole class of them, if they're truly identical. But mass appraisal systems are designed to, theoretically, under the Illinois law, you're supposed to be assessing a 3-year median of sales. So you take that house type and in that neighborhood code, and you looked at what has sold in the last 3 years, what is the median of it, and then therefore there is the value that you're supposed to be targeting. In reality, however, you will see the houses or the commercial buildings that traded in the last 5 years in the model will be treating those in a different way, and they many times will be assessed higher.
Okay. So how does the assessor's use of comparable sales and neighborhood factors play into why one property value might shift?
Yeah, they do have a mass appraisal system. So it's a computer aided mass appraisal system, and there's so many different factors. They have condition, meaning like what kind of condition is the property in. They have quality grade, meaning what were the original types of construction materials that were used in the construction of this. They have like certain depreciation models that are hard to explain. And if you ever ask an assessor to explain them to you, you'll see how hard they are to explain. And so it's basically, if you look in a detailed way at how the sausage gets made, you will see that any mass appraisal system has 50 different factors, and any one of those factors could be tweaked in one direction or another to have a significant impact on how your individual assessment may come out. So we've seen cases where properties that were, for all intents and purposes, the same, one of them had a condition grade of very good and the other one had a condition grade of fair. And that was enough to change the assessment by 20%. So sometimes all you need to do is show the assessor that the condition of the property is not as good as what they have in their computer aided mass appraisal system. And if you can do that and get them to agree to it and then change that right there can provide quite a bit of tax relief.
What about exemptions? Can things like an owner's exemption or senior freeze make two similar tax bills look completely different?
Yeah, for homeowners and for industrial properties, that's usually the number one explanation. When we get a property owner inquiring, they say, wait a minute, my tax bill is $10,000, and I'm just making up numbers. And I have a neighbor whose property is very similar to mine and their tax bill is half of that. Well, tax bills are a misleading way to try to understand whether or not you're being treated fairly, because the tax bill can be very greatly impacted by an incentive that the property you're thinking about might qualify for an incentive that you don't qualify for. Or in the case of a residential property, the property that you're looking at and comparing it to yours, they may be benefiting from significant homeowners exemptions that you don't qualify for. So we tell people, just don't look at the tax bill at all. Like, the pertinent unit of comparison is the market value on a per square foot basis. Mm-hmm. And then from there, if it's an industrial property that has a class 6B, or if it's a commercial property that has a class 8 or a class 7C, then from there, they're getting deep reduction of their assessed value, because if you have a commercial property that's worth $1 million and it's assessed as a class 5, which is how they're normally assessed, the assessment should be $250,000. However, if that same commercial property has a class 8 or a class 7C, then the assessed value should be $100,000. So, if you don't have the incentive, your bill is going to be 2.5 times greater than somebody who does have the incentive. And I do have clients who have this situation where they have a pre-existing shopping center that's been there for decades, and somebody has permission to build a center right across the street from theirs. And of course, in a high tax rate area, such as the southwest suburbs, they're not going to build this shopping center unless they have pre-approval for the commercial incentive. So now what you have is every single prospective tenant that is coming to look at your vacant space, they're not just looking at your center, they're looking at the center across the street. Mm-hmm. And the center across the street is saying they're going to charge you X number of dollars in rent and X number of dollars in real estate tax pass-throughs. So if you and your center are asking them to pay 2.5 times the real estate tax pass-throughs as what the center across the street is charging, that's going to put you at such a severe disadvantage that not only are you not going to gain new tenants, as soon as your existing tenants have their lease up, they're going to relocate to across the street. Yep. Because their going concern is with that intersection and not so much with your specific building. Like they can get their customers to go across the street. It's not that hard. And similarly, we've had situations where we've had commercial shopping center owners that own a property in, let's say, Oak Park, and there's a competing shopping center right across the street in the city of Chicago, literally across the street. Mm-hmm. So if you stand on the front porch of this commercial center and you look across the street, it's the city of Chicago. Now, city of Chicago had a local tax rate of 6%. Oak Park, when I first started representing the property I'm thinking about, they had a tax rate of 11%. So we're talking almost double.
Right.
And it's the same conversation. You're fighting for the same tenants, and your tax pass-throughs that you're asking the tenants to pick up are double what the competing center across the street is asking them to pay. So you can see that it's really a problem to talk about the tax bill, because it can be influenced by the fact that different municipalities can have very big differences in their local tax rates, and also one center with an incentive versus one center without an incentive. It's going to be a huge difference in the actual tax bills. Mm-hmm. And that's not an assessment problem. That's a policy problem. That's a tax policy problem.
Yeah, it's such a great point too. It's not about the bill, it's about the assessment. It's about the assessed value that you have to look at.
I do the assessment. I can't control whether or not the city that you're in is willing to give you an incentive like that. Mm-hmm. Oak Park, I don't think they would be willing to give an incentive like that. Yeah. Not on a property like that. A lot of them are not. And even for the municipalities that are willing to give out the incentives, we're seeing a broad trend in them being unwilling to renew the incentives. So when the incentive is over after 10 years and it sunsets for a year or two or whatever it is, it drops off, and then the tax bill is 2.5 times what it was before the incentive dropped off. And then, so these properties they're going bankrupt, and the people are losing them. And then the new owner that's going to come in is not going to close on the property unless they can get an incentive. Mm-hmm. So it's really become a cycle in certain areas, especially in the south and southwest suburbs.
Mm-hmm. I love Oak Park, but yeah, it is expensive. It's very expensive there.
Well, the problem is Oak Park is home rule. And, when they needed to clean up like big pension problems, they waited for a reassessment year. And when they had a big jump in their equalized assessed value, aggregate equalized assessed value in the municipality of Oak Park, what they did was they tacked on a huge amount of extra levy or money that they were asking for from the property tax. And they did it right after the assessments jumped in a huge way. And so therefore people got their bill, and their bill was similar to what it was the year before. And they didn't think that they had experienced a tax increase, but they had, because the city of Oak Park added on all this extra government spending. And so when the bill really should have gone down, the bill stayed the same. Mm-hmm. because they added on all this extra spending in a year when the equalized aggregate assessment had increased broadly. And so the taxpayers don't realize that there's tax increases when these municipalities balloon levy. So what I mean by Oak Park is home rule is they are not subject to the property tax extension limitation law. So they did not have to do a referendum to ask the voters if they could spend more than 105% of what they had spent before. They could do it by simple majority of the municipal leaders or the school board or whoever it was, and they decided this is our opportunity. We've got this opportunity to add all this government spending without making the tax bills actually increase. So the people say, I didn't get a tax increase. But you did. But your government spent huge amounts of more money. You really did get a tax increase. Because if the system would have worked the way it was supposed to work, it would have put downward pressure on the local tax rate, which would have been a big relief to a lot of the taxpayers in Oak Park, especially the commercial taxpayers.
Wow. Well, so back to our our comparison, our neighbor comparison. How often do you see errors in data, like square footage, classification? And I believe we talked a little bit about condition before that might contribute to these inconsistencies.
There's a lot of errors in data. That's one of the main reasons why I'll always have work to do, especially in Cook County. I think it's the data integrity in Cook County is very poor, and I don't see how it's going to improve. It's really very poor. They're assessing huge percentages of the housing stock based on maybe 5 main data points. How large is the structure? How much land is there? How old is the structure? Is it brick or frame? Like there's not a lot more to it than really those data points. There's a few more, but that's about it. And when you go outside of Cook County, you see that they have 30, 40 data points on each property. They know like what year was the siding, redone, and when did they remodel the kitchen, and when did they do the roof? And they definitely know most of the time if the basement is finished or if the attic is living space or things like that. So in Cook County, the data integrity is low, and there are a lot of property characteristics errors, even in commercial properties. We have, clients come to us, they just bought this property, the assessor's still assessing an addition that was torn down. So it's amazing how many errors there are on every single property classification in Cook County.
If a property owner believes their assessment isn't uniform with surrounding properties, what's the best way for them to document and present that argument?
It's hard because a lot of the jurisdictions do not make the data readily available or easy to understand. So, unfortunately, a lot of people do have to get a firm like mine involved because we do rent the assessor's full data, which is updated on a rolling basis. And we're able to use a lot of sophisticated tools to research whether or not an assessed value is considered in line or uniform with the properties around it. For commercial properties, the uniformity argument is not helpful in Illinois. I have yet to hear of someone say, I made a uniformity argument on an industrial or commercial property and it worked. It does work in other jurisdictions. Texas comes to mind, but in Illinois, they just don't care if your assessment is not uniform and you are a commercial or industrial property.
So is it fair to say that a uniformity argument is less persuasive compared to maybe a market value argument?
I would say that the burden of proof is much higher, and it might work for residential properties, the uniformity argument. It really depends. I think that the Cook County Board of Review really tries to bend over backwards to see it the taxpayer's way on a uniformity complaint. But outside of Cook County, that's not the way it is. Outside of Cook County, if there are any properties that are like yours in the same neighborhood code that are assessed higher on a per square foot basis, you may run into a decider of fact who tells you that you are bracketed between, properties that are assessed higher than yours and properties that are assessed lower than yours, and they may not see a change. So the burden of proof at the Property Tax Appeal Board is clear and convincing evidence on a uniformity case. And so when boards of review are taking an adjudicated perspective, that's what they have in the back of their mind. And what is PTAB going to do here? And if they no change 95 to 98% of uniformity cases, well, then why should I, work with this taxpayer and give them a reduction right now?
Yeah, that's a tough spot. That's a tough spot for people, for sure. For any property owners that might be frustrated by higher bills than their neighbors, what practical steps can they take this year to verify fairness and protect themselves long term?
Sometimes I would advise just checking with an attorney first before you go to the assessor, because sometimes when you point to a property that is assessed lower than yours, the response from the assessing official may be to raise the other property that you are comparing your property to, and that does not help you, and it doesn't help your neighbor.
Nope.
So you definitely want to make sure you have like a legally relevant, argument to make that isn't going to involve, oh, you think theirs is lower than yours? Well, here you go. I just raised theirs. I hope you're all happy now. You're all equal. So you don't want that. You don't want to create that situation. There may be something else going on that a trained eye might be able to see when they pull the property record card and they pull a spreadsheet full of all the properties in the neighborhood. And then you just have to keep the appeal deadlines in mind. And it's always a good idea to maintain your renovation records, monitor the sales that are going on in your neighborhood. We pick up the MLS sales. Sometimes there's certain markets where not all the sales are on the MLS, so you may know more than we do about some of the market activity, especially commercial properties south of I-80. They're not frequently on, CoStar or the MLS. So sometimes you need networks of appraisers to help you understand some of the listings and some of the things that have been listed or sold. So, but yeah, you want to review your assessment annually. Make sure you pay attention to those assessment notices that you get in the mail, because when you get the tax bill, it's 99% of the time too late to do anything about it. The time to act is when you get the assessment notice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't make your neighbor's taxes higher. You'll be off their Christmas card list immediately.
But you'll be uniform.
But you will be uniform. So I guess depending on your goals. All right, well, that's it for today's episode of Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax. If you've ever wondered whether your assessment is truly fair compared to your neighbors, Nora and her team at the Devine Law Group can help you evaluate your options. Visit thedivinelawgroup.com to learn more. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review so you don't miss any more future episodes. Nora, great to see you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always good to see you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.